The first time Calder Boone, age 30, saw the world that night, it was all white breath and drifting ghosts of snow, the kind that fall without sound and yet seem to whisper secrets if a man listens long enough. He'd been living out on this land alone for 6 winters, 6 slow, hollow winters that had carved quiet places inside him where conversation once lived. The wind moved like an old memory down the slope of the hills, brushing the corner of his coat as if reminding him that Christmas Eve should have meant something once. It didn't anymore, not since his father died and silence became the only companion he could trust. He tugged his hat lower against the storm and wondered, not for the first time, if a man could go so long without hearing another soft human voice that he might forget the sound altogether. The thought lingered, stirring a curiosity in his chest he didn't quite understand, and then the drifting dark shaped itself into a fragile silhouette. She came walking through the storm like a candle surviving its own wind. Solemn Whitefeather, age 20, barely more than a shadow at first, thin arms wrapped around herself, snow tangled in long dark hair, steps uneven like someone chasing the last of their strength. Calder blinked hard, uncertain if she was a trick of winter's cruelty, yet with each heartbeat she drew closer until the faint tremble of her lips was visible. She stopped before him, breath shuddering, eyes gentle yet frightened, and spoke in a voice that sounded too soft to belong anywhere in a storm this unforgiving. "May I stay for one night?" she asked, as if asking permission to exist. For a moment Calder just stared, his whole life rearranging itself in the cold air between them. And then, with a quiet ache growing in him he didn't have a name for yet, he nodded. But a strange heaviness followed, making him wonder what her arrival meant for a man who believed life no longer held surprises. Inside the cabin, warmth rose slowly from the iron stove like a long-forgotten blessing. Calder motioned for her to sit, unsure what words fit moments like this, unsure if he even had any left. Solon unwrapped her shawl with trembling hands, revealing a face too young to have already learned the language of hardship, yet her eyes carried it anyway. He sensed a story in those eyes, something bruised and wandering, a history she wasn't ready to speak. She accepted the blanket he offered, his father's old buffalo wool cover, and held it as though holding safety for the first time in weeks. Calder watched the firelight dance over her features and wondered how someone so gentle had ended up lost in snow that could swallow a person whole. He felt curiosity whisper again, but some deeper instinct told him that if he asked too soon, he might push her back into the cold she had escaped. The night passed with only the crackle of the fire between them. Calder found himself listening to the rhythm of her breathing, slow and cautious, as though she didn't quite trust the world not to vanish in her sleep. By dawn the storm had sealed the cabin shut in a crust of ice, turning the windows into frost-lit glass. When Calder stepped outside, he realized she would not be leaving today, not when snow climbed halfway up the cabin door. The world seemed smaller, quieter, as if made solely for the two of them, and the realization struck him with an unexpected warmth. He returned inside to find Solon awake, staring at the frozen light as though uncertain she deserved another day of shelter. He met her eyes and said simply, "Storm's got different plans." She nodded slowly, as if his words meant more than he intended, and yet a quiet unease settled in his chest, making him wonder what would happen when the storm finally let her go. They fell into a rhythm, neither spoke aloud. Calder chopped wood, Solon warmed the kettle. She stitched the torn edge of his coat with precise, delicate fingers. He taught her how to feed the horses without startling them. Each small moment between them held a quiet electricity, a slow-burning warmth that disguised itself as simple courtesy. Solon's voice remained soft, shaped by pauses, but sometimes, in brief flickers, laughter hid beneath her breath, quick, uncertain, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to let joy in. Calder noticed these moments more than he wanted to admit. He also noticed the way her presence changed the cabin. The fire seemed brighter, the shadows softer, even the silence warmer. Yet with every gesture he shared, every moment she stepped closer to comfort, a whisper of fear rose in him, fear that if he grew used to this, he might not know how to return to loneliness. It was on the 5th morning that Sheriff Amos Braddock rode past Calder's gate, saddle creaking, breath fogging out behind his horse like smoke. He spotted Solon standing beside the cabin, her hair catching light though the day was overcast. The sheriff slowed, frowning first at her, then at Calder. "Didn't know you were keeping company out here," he said, voice sharp enough to hurt. Calder stiffened. Solon stepped behind him instinctively. Braddock tilted his hat downward, suspicion tightening his jaw. "Strangers bring trouble. Best send her back where she came from." Calder felt heat rise through him, a mix of anger and shame woven tight. "Storm found her, not I," he said evenly. "She's safe here." But the sheriff's stare lingered, heavy with judgment, as if kindness was a crime. Braddock finally rode on, leaving behind a tension that clung to the air like the cold. Solon whispered a soft apology, but Calder shook his head, unsettled by how fiercely he wanted her to stay. The days that followed softened into something delicate. Solon learned to braid rope with nimble expertise. Calder found himself watching the way she touched the horses, light, respectful, trusting that they would trust her back. In the nights by the fire, she shared fragments of her life. The winter migration her people attempted, the sudden storm that separated her from them, the long walk through wilderness hoping to find shelter before the cold closed her eyes forever. Calder felt something shift inside him, something long locked away, something that woke when she spoke. He told her of his father, of the quiet years after his passing, of the strange way emptiness becomes normal when no one interrupts it. Their stories mingled like two slow rivers finding each other. And every time she smiled, small, unsure, but real, Calder felt a knot inside him loosen, stirring a curiosity he wasn't sure he should follow. But quiet didn't last long on this land. One moonless night, while the world lay dark as pitch, distant hoofbeats echoed like a warning across the valley. Calder stepped outside, lantern in hand, heart tightening. Sheriff Braddock approached with 3 men behind him, faces shadowed, eyes cold. Their torches flickered wildly in the wind. "You were told once," Braddock said, not bothering with greetings, "and I don't like repeating myself. Remove the native woman from your land before sunrise." Solon appeared in the doorway, pale fear drifting through her expression. Calder moved instantly, shielding her from their gaze. "She's done nothing," he said. "She stays." The sheriff stepped closer, jaw tightening. "You'll be charged for harboring vagrants." Solon tugged lightly at Calder's arm, whispering, "I will go, you shouldn't face trouble for me." But Calder's voice came low, unwavering, shaped by something he hadn't felt in years. "You're not going anywhere." The sheriff stared at him long and hard before retreating, leaving hoofprints like scars across the snow. Yet as the lantern dimmed, Calder felt a storm begin inside him that no weather could match. Sleep didn't find him that night. He sat by the fire, jaw tense, wrestling with thoughts he'd ignored for too long. Loving someone meant risking the kind of loss that could break a man entirely. He'd lived 6 years without risking anything. But here she was, Solon, quiet, brave, gentle, and he couldn't bear the thought of sending her back into a world that had already taken too much from her. She sat down beside him without speaking, her shoulder touching his in a way that steadied him more than words could. Their hands found each other slowly, shyly, trembling as if both feared the other might pull away. Calder closed his eyes, realizing with trembling certainty that his life had changed the moment she stepped out of that snowstorm. And with that realization came a second, stronger one. He didn't want a world where she walked away. When dawn arrived, soft as a whispered promise, snow fell in delicate flakes around them. Calder stepped outside to breathe the morning air, gathering resolve that felt fragile but necessary. Solon joined him, her breath forming small clouds in the cold. He turned to her, heart pounding in a way that made him feel both young and ancient. "Solon," he said quietly, "I don't want you to stay because of fear or storms. I want you to stay because this place feels like something new with you in it." She looked down, uncertainty trembling at the corners of her mouth. He lifted a hand, brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. "Will you stay with me?" Her eyes shone, full of questions and hope and disbelief that she could be wanted this gently. "Yes," she whispered. "I will stay." The snow swirled softly around them, sealing the moment like a vow written in winter's hand. Still, a soft unease lingered in the air, hinting the world beyond his land would not let them be so easily. When the storm lessened enough to ride, Calder saddled his horse and brought out the mare for Solon. They rode side by side toward town, their breaths forming twin trails in the cold air. People paused in doorways when they arrived, eyes sharp with judgment, whispers sliding through the streets like wind. Calder ignored them all. Solon kept her gaze low, but her hand brushed his now and then with small, grounding touches. Pastor Ellery Finch met them at the church door, a gentle man with gray hair and a voice that held no prejudice. He welcomed them inside, lit candles, and performed a quiet, simple ceremony. Calder's voice shook when he said her name, the first name he'd spoken with reverence in years. Solon tied a beaded ribbon around his wrist, a piece from her people's tradition, symbolic and beautiful. Snow drifted through the open window of the small chapel, catching the candlelight like falling stars. They stepped out as husband and wife, the world looking somehow softer for the first time in years. But a sudden ripple of tension moved through the watching crowd, warning that their moment of peace would not stand unchallenged. Sheriff Braddock appeared again, boots crunching through the snow, his gaze cold enough to crack the air. "You're making a mistake, Boone," he said, voice laced with authority and spite. Calder stood tall, Solon's hand resting gently against his. Before Braddock could step closer, a quiet shift occurred. Townsfolk who'd watched from behind windows now stepped forward. A baker's wife, a rancher, a young man with his hat in his hands. They formed a loose circle around the couple, their silence implying a collective refusal to support the sheriff's cruelty. Braddock's jaw clenched, realizing he could push this no further. After a long, ugly moment, he turned his horse around and rode away without another word. The tension dissolved into the cold air as Calder exhaled slowly, feeling Solon's fingers tighten around his. Yet even with the sheriff gone, a subtle tremor remained in Calder's heart, proof that love carried its own storms. They returned to the ranch as twilight settled over the valley, the sky painted in violets and silver blues. Snow shimmered on the cabin roof, smoke curling from the chimney like an invitation into warmth. Inside, Solon placed a woven charm from her people above the door, a small symbol of beginnings and protection. Calder watched her with a softness he didn't know he possessed. For the first time, the cabin felt like a home rather than a shelter for one man's loneliness. They shared a meal in gentle silence, the firelight reflecting in their eyes. Later, as night deepened, Calder rested his hand over hers, feeling her pulse steady and resilient. He realized love had arrived not with thunder, but with footsteps in the snow, asking only for one night, yet rewriting his entire future. And in that quiet realization, curiosity stirred once more, wondering what their life would become now that neither faced the world alone. If you ever find yourself in a winter of the heart, wandering through storms that seem unending, remember this: sometimes salvation knocks softly, carrying its fear and hope in equal measure. Sometimes love doesn't shout, it whispers, asking only for a night's shelter before changing everything it touches. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open the door, even when snow gathers high and the world feels cold. Because what begins as a single moment of kindness can become the warmth that guides you through every winter still to come. And if you listen just right, you might hear life itself asking, in its quietest voice, "May I stay for one night?"